are they in a good enough position this year with Jalen Hurts to give him a fair shake and go, yes, either this guy is our quarterback for the next several years, or this guy isn't our quarterback starting immediately next season?
Yeah, I mean, going back to your original question, did you see enough? I saw enough to say, hey, I'm interested. I want to see more. Okay, that's about the extent of it. Now, do I think he's going to be the next Deshaun Watson, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes? No, I don't know. I mean, I think he's worth a look. He certainly gives you mobility. He can run with the ball. I'd like to see him a little more accurate as a passer. But the fact of the matter is what we saw was good, partly because what we saw before with Carson Wentz last year, I'm talking about last year, was so bad. It was a wake-up call for any Eagles fan that, holy cow, now suddenly we've got a pulse on offense. We can move the ball up and down the field. And I thought that was at least worth looking more at. So this year, do you find out? Yeah, we hope you'd find out something this year, because I think there was enough there to explore.
A Football Friday edition here on Birds 365. Sometimes it's a casual Friday. I don't know about you, Johnny Mac. You look like you're in a T-shirt. Is that a T-shirt you got going?
I got the collar, Jody.
Oh, okay. I don't.
I at least got the collar.
I went purely T-shirt today because my daughter was good enough to buy this for me for Father's Day. So it's a casual Friday. Let's see. Our next guest looks quasi-casual. He's rocking a good hat with us.
He's got the Canadiens hat. There we go.
Oh,
Montreal.
I didn't make that out. Is that a C?
Yeah.
Is that a Canadian? Oh, there he goes. Very good.
Yeah. Stanley Cup Finals for the first time in how long, Clark Judge? How long has it been?
1993.
Wow. Damn. Even longer than I imagined. I think it's good when a team like Montreal gets in the Stanley Cup Finals. I think it's good when Boston, the Celtics are in the, but people probably don't like that. But it's been a long time since.
Been a long time. I think it's great for Canada. I love seeing Canadian teams in the Stanley Cup Finals. It hasn't been that frequent, but the last time a team from Canada won a Stanley Cup was 1993 with Montreal. Wow. But yeah, Montreal. But this isn't a great team. It's not really a really good team, but right now they are, because they're playing confidently. They're playing with all sorts of momentum, and they've got a very, very hot goalie. So it's a complete team effort. They don't have great goal scorers. They've just got a lot of people who are taking advantage of the opportunity. It's a lot of fun to watch them. A lot of fun.
Yeah, Carey Price has been on fire here in this postseason after they fell behind 3-1 to Toronto. All of a sudden, it was like he and the team flipped the switch, and they've been dynamite ever since. I've always thought of you as a New York guy. How'd you become a Canadiens fan there, buddy?
Always followed them. My dad was in the service, so we moved all over the country. I mean, I go way back to the 60s, and I started following hockey with the Red Wings with Roger Crozier, Gordie Howe, those guys, Ted Lindsay, Del Vecchio. I loved watching them. But then when I watched Montreal, they played with such speed and finesse that I loved their game. And of course, then they started winning. Well, not started, they were winning a lot. So that was appealing. But I loved watching them play. And I've become a lifelong and long-suffering Canadiens fan. And this is just so great to see. I don't know if you guys watched that game last night, but outside the Bell Centre last night, the fans are going crazy. I mean, there were thousands watching. Just great for Montreal. It's great for Canada. And I think it's great for the NHL.
I mean, the Flyers haven't won for a long time here in Philadelphia, but I remember, going back to the days of Ken Dryden. I mean, those Canadian teams, those were just phenomenal. And I remember the Flyers. So I just remember Flyers fans would get really, really upset because Ken Dryden was that good. And there was nothing they could do.
He was that good. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I tell stories all the time about the Summit Series when Ken Dryden was the goalie there. He was spectacular. It was a different game. I mean, there were stand-up goalies. Guys weren't getting in front of the net like they are today. I don't see how goalies play the way they do today with all the interference that's going on in front of them. And yet they're all remarkable. I mean, Leonard played really well last night and got beaten on a shot that he couldn't have stopped. But I think it's a remarkable game. I love watching it. Dryden was spectacular. My favorite player was Cornwall. Loved watching the Road Runner because he could fly. And I love teams that are fast. And Montreal is a fast team. And they've built the the club the way I think playoff teams should be built from the back end up. Good goalie. They've got 4 really good and big defensemen, and they've got momentum right now, so they're playing well.
Yeah, and as fast as Cornway, he wasn't the Rocket. There was only one player that they named the Rocket, so I'm sorry. Mr. Richard was the fastest guy out there on the ice. But we digress. We didn't get John to talk hockey, but we do love the hat, and we give you credit for it. And good luck in the upcoming Stanley Cup final. Now, we wanted to talk football with you, and we appreciate you coming on board. I read an interesting thing on Pro Football Talk today. Someone finally noticed and brought it out that Aaron Rodgers could opt out this year. Now, he would give up his salary if he chooses to do so, because we are still in the midst of a pandemic. Even though we may be beating it back, it is still certainly something that we deal with on a day in, day out basis. And if you haven't been vaccinated in the NFL, all other sports, you certainly are dealing with it with the restrictions you're under. But it is also given the players an option that if they want to opt out this season, they can. And while they won't be paid their salary, they will not have certain ramifications held against them, like skipping preseason games, like giving back roster bonuses for being on the team, that Aaron Rodgers could just choose to opt out, and it wouldn't be as punitive as if he held out. Do you think that's really an option for the Green Bay Packers starting quarterback?
I think everything is an option for Aaron Rodgers. I really do, because if you know him, and I don't know him well, I certainly have dealt with him. He is what Mark Murphy said, very complicated guy, very smart guy, honestly, a somewhat arrogant guy, but that's what you want in a leader for a football team, and he's the leader of that team. But he's tough to figure at times, and when he puts his foot down and believes very strongly about some things, he follows through, and he doesn't care what anyone else says. I have said for a long time, listening to what he's saying, or not listening to what others are saying, and some of it, which I think comes from him, but listening to what's going on and the fact he didn't show up at minicamp. I don't think he's going to show up at training camp. I do think he's resolved not to play for that team again. Now, I know others that say, no, that's not the case. I mean, look, he signed up for the Green Bay Country Club again. I don't care. And Aaron Rodgers is a strongly independent individual. He does what Aaron Rodgers wants to do. And I think he's really set his foot in cement on this thing and said, okay, let's see who blinks first. And it does remind me, and John, you'd remember this, and it reminds me somewhat of 2012, 2011 with Carson Palmer. And then it was 2012, I think. But with Cincinnati, Carson Palmer said, I'm not playing with you again. I'm not going back to Cincinnati. And Mike Brown said, no, you are. We're not trading you. We are not trading you. And I'll retire first. No, you're staying with this team. And then what happened was Marvin Lewis goes out there, and Marvin Lewis comes back and says, he's going to retire. And I had a friend who was a next door neighbor told me the same thing. He's retiring. He's not going to play for Cincinnati again. So the Bengals up and drafted Andy Dalton in the second round. Lo and behold, they were 6-2 in midseason. And Mike Brown, the guy who said, I will never trade him, traded him to the Oakland Raiders. So maybe that happens here, but I think it's somewhat similar, because it reminds people of the Brett Favre situation. It reminds me more of that Carson Palmer situation, because Carson Palmer is defiant. And Aaron Rodgers, honestly, is defiant here too. And I do think he's just waiting to see who moves first.
Now, Clark, the problem with the opt-out scenario is he would have to make a decision really, really quickly, July 2nd. So essentially next week. So that kind of limits your strategy to try to use that. The Carson, I've used that myself. I agree with you. The Carson Palmer situation, but he had to get back, I think, $23 million if he retired. So,
but he's got a lot of money, John. He's got a lot of money.
He doesn't need the money, but I've yet to meet the person that wants to cut the $23 million check going the other way. Maybe it is such an interesting scenario. But I want to talk about it, Clark, from the perspective of if it does happen, and say it's Denver, how drastic is the shift in the NFL landscape as far as Green Bay being a contender to Denver becoming a contender?
That's exactly what would happen. I mean, Green Bay, you'd probably put at the bottom of the division, or well, Detroit's there, so maybe down there with Detroit, but no longer is Green Bay a playoff factor. That's how big a difference he makes. And suddenly Denver, which hasn't had a credible quarterback really since Peyton Manning was there, suddenly does become a factor in an AFC West, which now, if that were to happen, would be very top heavy. You have Kansas City. I do think the Chargers are going to be good this year. I think they're going to be better, much better. and you've got Denver. And we saw what happened when Peyton Manning went there. He completely revitalized that team. I think the same thing would happen here, and you'd suddenly have to include the Denver Broncos if this were to happen. Again, that's a big if this were to happen, as a playoff favorite and as a division threat to Kansas City and maybe, just maybe, the Chargers.
I put this question to Clark, but Johnny Mack, if you want to give me your insight on this too, please do so. They're thinking about moving the combine. They didn't have it this past year because of COVID related issues. They will have it in 2021 back in Indianapolis. But after decades of being there, they're thinking about moving it elsewhere. Why? To make it more of a moneymaker. What else is new? The NFL trying to monetize everything. They're very good at that. Should they really do that? You guys worked it. I never went to the combine. I watch it on TV like everybody else. I've been to Indianapolis, great town. You can stay indoors. You don't even have to go. It's all connected by tunnels. So I know how it works. And that's a beautiful domed stadium. Do they have to move it? Do they need to wring out every single last dollar possible? Is this a foolish conversation the NFL is having, Clark?
I don't think it's a foolish conversation. If you talk to the owners are always interested in making more money. What did John just say about Aaron Rodgers? I mean, would you leave $23 million on the side? They look at this as a money-making proposal. Always have, because I started covering that thing back in the early 90s when there were literally about 6 or 7 reporters there. And nobody's making any money. Nobody is. And then you fast forward to today, and I haven't been there in a few years, but John, I think it's something like 1,000 people there right now, and they charge admission for attending the combine. When the thing is, you're watching people run in shorts. You're watching some guys run in shorts, 40-yard wind sprints. I mean, that's what you're going to watch, but people pay for that, and they've monetized the media day at Super Bowls too. So is that what you should be doing? No, maybe it's not, but that's a romantic, and as someone who's old school, and people say in the NFL, get with it. We're trying to make as much money as possible. So how are we going to do this? I fully expect it's going to go to North Dallas, to be honest with you, because Jerry Jones knows how to make money.
Jerry built that place.
That's right.
With the combine in mind. He's got a hotel there. He's got the indoor facility, that boxing matches. He built that place because there's no more powerful owner. Jerry knew what was coming to get the combine. In Los Angeles, they're doing the same thing.
Exactly.
Minnesota has a brand new facility that can hold it. There's a couple others, Clark, but I'm with you. I mean, I want the draft to be in Radio City Music Hall, and I want the combine to be in Indianapolis, but life moves on. And I also want to add that the NFL Network is now talking about bringing on partners,
media,
because all this league wants to do is monetize.
That's right. And John, there are people within that office that I've known for years. In fact, my wife's one of them. She used to work there for 24 years. And they look back and say, it used to be this way. It used to be this way. And I'll go, it's not that way anymore. I know people there say it used to be about football. And then it became about making money. And that's what it's all about today. And it's just like you said, people say, get with the program. We're monetizing everything. And I'm glad you mentioned the draft. That's exactly Exhibit A. The draft was in New York for, years, Jody. Yeah. I mean, Jody, forever. And I love going to radio venue. But they decided, hey, if we take this on the road, what do you think? You guys know. I mean, people know.
Oh, tell me we're losing Clark too. That apparently, you still there, Clark?
Yep, I am.
Okay.
We lost you for a second at the end, but the monetizing aspect, you mentioned the draft is on the road now. The combine was next. Los Angeles, they're kind of building up this whole, ecosystem with the NFL Network, and obviously it's going to be in the Super Bowl system, Super Bowl rotation. And then the betting aspect of it, Clark. That's really, Roger Goodell has said, I want this to be a $25 billion industry by the time I leave. He's going to get there. He's going to get there. Yep. And this is the way you get there.
Absolutely right. And I think what you saw, what Paul Tagliabue said a week ago or so about sports betting, I think that's a very slippery slope to get involved in, but all the sports leagues are doing it. And the
Yeah.
NFL is leading the pack. And you're right. Again, it goes to making money. And who was involved right from the beginning? Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft. They signed off immediately on the DraftKings deal and somebody else, whatever another betting site was. But that's what's driving the train. It's making money. And I do think I remember years ago, a friend of mine said, you know why the NFL is so popular? It's a great game, yeah, but gambling. And they know that. And they finally woke up to it.
That's the only thing that bothers me. They were so anti-gambling for so long, and now there's money to be made. Oh, well, let's throw our arms around gambling, which is hypocritical. But hey, you got to do what you got to do, and they are the best at monetizing things and making money. All right, let's take it back out onto the field. Since we talked about a whole bunch of things off the field, Clark. This is Birds 365, and we talk more Eagles than anything else. You got a peek at Jalen Hurts last year. I'd like to get people on who aren't involved on a day-in, day-out basis and overanalyzing every single snap and every aspect of it. Someone from outside looking in, did you see enough from Jalen Hurts to make you say, all right, yeah, this guy's worth taking a shot at? Not a guarantee. You're only committed as a second-round draft pick. They have accumulated this draft capital that they have going forward, so if they want or need to go in another direction next year, they can. But are they in a good enough position this year with Jalen Hurts to give him a fair shake and go, yes, either this guy is our quarterback for the next several years or this guy isn't our quarterback starting immediately next season?
Yeah, I mean, going back to your original question, did you see enough? I saw enough to say, hey, I'm interested. I want to see more. Okay, that's about the extent of it. Now, do I think he's going to be the next Deshaun Watson, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes? I don't know. I mean, I think he's worth a look. He certainly gives you mobility. He can run with the ball. I'd like to see him a little more accurate as a passer. But the fact of the matter is what we saw was good, partly because what we saw before with Carson Wentz last year, I'm talking about last year, was so bad. And I'm not faulting Carson Wentz. I know there are a zillion issues going on. However, it was a wake-up call for any Eagles fan that, holy cow, now suddenly we've got a pulse on offense. We can move the ball up and down the field. And I thought that was at least worth looking more at. So this year, do you find out? Yeah, I would hope you'd find out something this year because I think there was enough there to explore.
Hey, Clark, I want to talk about your latest podcast. I see you had Dan Pompei on, and that's Eye Test for Two for those who want to check it out. And it's about a lot about the Bears and Justin Fields and their plan moving forward, which they kind of said Andy Dalton's going to be the starter. It's not a competition early on. But look, Matt Nagy's coaching for his job.
Right.
Ryan Pace is GMing for his job, whatever you want to call that. How patient can you be in the modern NFL when you have a big-time quarterback, first-round pick? Yeah, it's not top 5, but they traded up to get him. He's almost, top 10. How much pressure is there to put those guys on the field quickly?
A ton, because just like you said, the head coach is under fire, even though they went to the playoffs last year. They were 8-8, right? The GM should be under fire. Actually, I'm surprised Ryan Pace is still there. He missed with Mitch Trubisky, and that's a costly mistake with the second pick of the draft. Then you missed with Nick Foles, bringing him in there. Now you're telling us that, okay, this is the future quarterback, Justin Fields, all right? Fans believe that because they don't want to hear about Andy Dalton. And if I were a fan, I wouldn't want to hear about Andy Dalton either. But this is all you need to know about patience, John. And again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm preaching to the choir. 2017, remember that with Houston? Tom Savage was going to be the quarterback. We drafted Deshaun Watson to sit on the bench and learn. We're going to learn with Deshaun Watson. When he's ready, he will play. But Tom Savage is our quarterback. That plan lasted for one half of the season opener. That was it. So that's how much pressure there is.
Well, I'll give the Eagles this much credit. They were ahead of the curve. They tried to tell us Sam Bradford was going to be the quarterback when they took Carson Wentz with the second pick of the draft. Oops. We get a first-round draft pick for Sam Bradford. Sam, good knowing you. Carson, guess what? You're jumping in as a starting quarterback. So we know exactly the point you're trying to make. One of the things I did want to get you on, because John and I discussed this earlier this week about Hall of Fame. One of your compatriots, our buddy Paul Domwich from Philadelphia, is not going to be writing going forward for the Daily News, but he's been in that room with you the last several years, Hall of Fame voting and the like. when do you lose or when do you give up your Hall of Fame voting status? We don't know the procedure. First of all, how do you get it? And then if you step away from your main writing gig, are you asked to give it up?
Yeah, good questions. How do you get it? You have to have covered a football team as a beat reporter. There are 32 teams, so there are 32 individuals from the cities where those teams are. So let's just say John was the beat reporter for the Eagles for a few years. The Hall of Fame then taps you to say, John, we would like you to be the Eagles representative in that room. Okay, so if there's ever an Eagles player who comes up for question, you're the guy that would present him. So that's how you do it. You have to have some history as a beat reporter, and then you're chosen by the Pro Football Hall of Fame. How do you get off? You really don't unless you want to voluntarily leave or you're told to leave. And for instance, Paul, who's an invaluable member of that group, and I mean that if you're in that room, I'm sure you guys certainly know him. He's terrific. But he's now moved on to, I think, write books, and I think he's going to do some other ventures outside, but he will stay on there because he's got a history of covering that team. He's an at-large guy, I think. I mean, no, maybe he's the Philadelphia.
No, he's the Philly guy.
He's a Philly guy. But there are, in addition to those 32, there are 16 at-large members. I'm one of them. So I've covered numbers of teams, but they put me in as an at-large guy. We've got Dan Fouts, James Lofton as Hall of Famers who are at-large people. There's 16 people who are at-large tapped by the Hall of Fame. But you're on there as long as the Pro Football Hall of Fame is comfortable with you. And I'll give you an example. Vito Stellino, who covered the Steelers with Pittsburgh, then Washington and Jacksonville, he stopped covering the Jaguars, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, but was still involved sort of peripherally in that. He's got his own website, vitostellino.com. He was on there until this past year, and then he stepped down. Ira Miller, whom I covered the 49ers with in San Francisco, had done some internet work after leaving the Chronicle, but he stepped down last year as well. So you're on there really until the Pro Football Hall of Fame just says, I think we need to go in another direction. Or you say, I've had enough.
Clark, I want to talk to you about the 2021 class. So for those who don't know, it's probably headlined by Peyton Manning, Calvin Johnson, as well, Alan Banneker, John Lynch, who am I missing? Drew Pearson, Charles Woodson, I think is going in.
Calvin Johnson, Megatron.
Yeah, Calvin. Calvin's the interesting one for me because obviously he's a Hall of Fame player, but a little bit of a shortened career by his own accord. How do you guys weigh that? That is one dip. Terrell Davis, I would put in that category as well. There have been so many great players who maybe, one of the guys that I think should be in the Hall of Fame, but the shelf life was very short, was Chuck Foreman in Minnesota. When you talk about short shelf lives, longevity, how do you kind of weigh that?
It's a good question. I believe very strongly longevity is one of the key factors in weighing the candidacies of Hall of Famers. But the Terrell Davis situation, and frankly, Kenny Easley was in the same class. He had an abbreviated career, but they changed the landscape because Terrell Davis, if you look at his career, essentially had 3 really good years, stellar years, at 4 good years, but 3.5 stellar years. And then he was gone, and he was gone because of a career-ending injury. And in my mind, I thought that was too short. Now, the presentation by Jeff Legwold of Denver was convincing because if you look at his postseason stats, you look at what he did while he was in there, he was a generational talent. But that was only for 3 or 4 years. And I can make the argument, you guys can look up these people. You take a guy like Art Powell. He had 3 great seasons, 3 stellar seasons. Warren Wells had some issues, big issues off the field. 3 stellar seasons. Why aren't they suddenly candidates? And now you've really sort of lowered the bar. I'm not trying to say that Terrell Davis shouldn't be in. There's an argument to be made, but the argument is this, and that's what a longevity. But what it's done now is open the door for everyone else, and that's one of the reasons you see Tony Baselli now is a top 10 finalist. Tony Baselli, people used to say the career is not long enough. And now I say, yeah, it is. And while he was there, he was as good at his position as Terrell Davis was at his. But we don't have that measuring stick for tackles that we do for running backs. Yards per carry, yards per catch, all that stuff. 2,000-yard seasons. But I think you'll see Baselli get in this year. I will tell you this: I don't think he would make it if Kenny Easley and Terrell Davis hadn't happened. But now that they have, it's changed everything so that longevity should not be an issue. Now, I tell you that, guys, even though in that room, when we talk about Baselli, it still continues to come up. And my point is, it shouldn't. It can't anymore. It can't. But we'll find out this year, because this, to me, is the year Baselli's got to make. This year is wide open, the Hall of Fame. I'm talking about 2022.
Yeah. You can tell by Clark's impassioned stance there. He's a precedent guy. He believes in precedent. Once you set the precedent, then you have to act on the precedent, which is a perfectly fine way of handling it. All right, I'm going to ask you to tell a personal Hall of Fame story, and I'll set it up for you. You do your prep work coming in. You know who the finalists are. You do all your studying. You do your pre-work before you get in the room, and then you get in the room. I'm sure you got computer access in case you got to look something up. Who gave the best speech that you were leaning towards? Yeah, no, on the bubble, not really for me, probably gonna vote no, but someone got up there and gave an impassioned plea and or quoted something, a stat or a stance or a happenstance or a circumstance that transpired during their time with that team. You said, damn, didn't know that. Man, I hadn't considered that. Holy mackerel. Maybe I should rethink my... Who gave the best impassioned plea in the room with you there and actually swung your vote?
Okay, I'm not going to give you one. I'll give you two. But the best speech always is the one, for instance, Ira Miller, I suggested earlier was with the Chronicle, and he was when he presented Joe Montana. He stood up and said, Joe Montana, and sat down. That's the best speech. That's the best speech. And so nothing more. But there are two. One was Ira Kaufman, who I do this podcast with. John, thanks for mentioning that podcast. I test for two, but John, Ira was presenting Warren Sapp, and he stood up, and his introductory speech was so good. I won't tell you what was said because it's not actually for public listening, I think. Okay. But he said something that had the room in hysterics. And it got your attention because I said, I'm Warren Sapp. I'm not doing a first ballot. I'm not doing it for numbers of reasons we don't need to go into. But he tipped the room, and it was a great speech. It was impassioned. Basically, his point was, listen, so he doesn't practice during the week. So he doesn't practice well maybe during the week. On Sundays, he's always there. And he gave us an example and gave us a reason why. But the one that comes to mind most, Jody, that you mentioned is somebody didn't swing my vote. It just reinforced my vote. Okay. Morton Anderson came up thinking, I'm off the top of my head, 2016, 17, I think it's 16. Yeah. But in any case, all-time leading scorer at that time, a two-time all-decade choice, all right, place kicker. We know Atlanta, New Orleans, two-time all-decade choice. But he was a kicker. And at that time, we had one kicker, Jan Stener in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We also had two specialists, Jan Stener and Ray Guy. And so suddenly... Morton Anderson is again a top 15 finalist, and you hear the room swing. These guys are only on the field 5 or 6 plays. I don't think we should be doing this. Blah blah blah. And it's going back and forth. And Dan Fouts said, I must be missing something here because we got the analytics guys and they were telling things. And Dan Fouts said, I must be missing something here. He was the best at his position for 20 years. And we're not going to put him in. I don't care what the percentages say. I don't care. He was the best at his position. Somebody then tried to contradict Dan, and Ron Borges from the Boston Herald at that time said, as only Ron can, in an impassioned way, let's just call it what it is, guys. We're not putting kickers or punters in. That's it. Let's just call it that. We're never going to put them in. And the guy who had brought the objection said, no, that's not what I'm saying. Ron said, that's exactly what you're saying. This guy's the all-time leading scorer. He was a two-time all-decade choice. He couldn't be any better in his position. And we're just saying, nah, he's not good enough. Why? Because he's a kicker. So let's just make it a rule now. Kickers and punters, you don't need to apply. And that was it. There was no more discussion. He goes through and he gets in the Hall of Fame as he should have.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Clark, because I'm always talking about recency bias. And you brought up the name Ray Guy. I mean, if you look at Ray Guy was so much better in his era than anybody else. But if you look at the numbers, there's a bunch of punters today that can, for whatever reason, better nutrition, strength, condition, whatever. How do you guys kind of force the other guys? I don't want to pick people out, but you got to look at guys with their peers as opposed to just numbers from an analytics standpoint, which might explode because the game has changed or what have you, because of nutrition, all that kind of stuff.
Right. That's a very good question, John. And what it does is identify you, Jody, and me as old guys in the eyes of a lot of people. They go,
old
you guys.
School. We like old school.
That's right.
Old school is cool.
Yeah. And they go, oh, you guys, you're looking back to the past, you're romanticizing it. And I go, I didn't romanticize Ray Guy. I saw him play. Did you see him play?
Better than everybody else.
Yeah. And the younger the room gets, and I'm not trying to pick out particular individuals, but the younger the room gets, the more distance they are from persons like that. I mean, they don't know who Ray Guy was because they didn't see him play. They have a sheet in front of them that tells them what his punting average was, his net average was. And it's like you said, you go, well, look at it versus Shane Leckler. Well, they don't have a Shane Leckler award. They have a Ray Guy award for good reason. And in that room, I remember saying, hey, listen, he's the one of only two guys on the 75th anniversary team who's not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Ray Guy. The other guy's Billy White Shoes Johnson. What are we missing here? All I know about Ray Guy is he's so good that they named the best punter, the award for the best punter in college football after him. It's the Ray Guy Award. At which point someone said, yeah, well, the best offensive lineman was Dave Remington, right? That's why they named the award the Dave Remington Award. I don't think he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. To which point I said, tell me where Dave Remington is on the 75th anniversary team. He's not there. All right. What are we missing here? So Ray Guy should have gone in a long time ago. But there is a fight, not a fight so much, but there is a struggle within that room of stats, analytics, whatever you want to call it, versus, quite honestly, the eye test. And when people say, I saw Ray Guy, if you saw Ray Guy play, you knew he was a generational talent. Same thing. If you saw Gale Sayers, there's a guy with an abbreviated career. If you saw Gale Sayers, he made an impression, and you knew what you were looking at. And I don't think I have to tell you guys. I mean, listen, I go back, and I honestly don't know how old you guys are, but I think you're probably somewhat the same vintage as I. I remember watching Unitas play. I did, and I thought I'd never seen anything like him. And yet, if you want to take the analytics or stats or whatever, passer rating, I think the last time I checked, which was like a year ago, he was something like 77th. And so you could look at that and go, why would you put this guy in?
Clark, real quick. I remember 92.3 for a reason, because that was Joe Montana's passer rating when he retired. Yep. Now, if you're 92.3 the NFL, you're an average quarterback. Average quarterback.
John, the game's changed so much, which is difficult for younger people to understand. If they watched the game in the 70s and 80s, it was a vertical passing game. It wasn't a horizontal passing game. All I know about passing percentages is either one of you two guys were to run in front of me as the quarterback, and I toss you a 2-foot forward lateral. It's a forward pass, and it's a completion. I didn't see those guys, and I'm going back to Tarkin and Unitas, Montana. I'm going to go like, Elway Marino. They weren't doing that. And receivers weren't crossing the middle. They weren't, because you went across the middle at your own risk. I understand why all those precautions have been made. It's to protect players. But I just talked to Mark Clayton last week. He goes, there was nothing like a defenseless receiver in my day. Nothing like that. You go across the middle, you got tattooed. And I understand why the NFL is vigilant about that. I get it. But it's a different game. So you're right. When you start playing with numbers, you can do anything with them.
Clark, last thing, and this has been a great conversation. Thank you very much. Last year, you did the Hall of Fame voting virtually.
Yeah.
Like everything else. We all had to adjust to the pandemic time in which we were living. I'm hoping for you guys' sake that you're going to do it as you have day before Super Bowl at the site of the Super Bowl this year. Has that been locked in yet? Am I correct to assume that it hasn't been decided one way or the other?
You are correct, Jody. I don't know the answer to that. And my suspicion, again, this is a suspicion, is that we would do it virtually. That's not talking to anyone, nothing more than just intuition for this reason. A, it's easier to put 50 guys on a conference call. B, it's cheaper.
Cheaper, yeah.
And so that may be what happens. I hope not, because when you get in that room, there's a different dynamic, and you can feel a room shift. You can feel a room shift then. And I do think it's a good way of doing it. I know the criticisms involved and I understand them, but there are a lot of positives to it as well. And I think when you face a voter face to face, and you're able to ask questions, and like I mentioned, that Ron Borges conversation, when you're able to do something like that, you can swing a room.
I didn't even get to ask my question. You answered it without me asking it. Sounds like you would prefer to do it in a room with a group. I hope that's the way it plays out for you. I fear you could be right that it will be done virtually for cost purposes. The NFL, something the NFL can't monetize, the Hall of Fame vote. But dollars and cents do factor in. I hope they factor for you being able to get back in the room. We appreciate greatly, virtually as it is, that you joined us here today. You gave us some great stuff, Clark. Thanks much.
I appreciate it, guys. Remember, go Habs, go Habs, go.
By the next time we have you back on, we'll know whether the Canadiens are or aren't the Stanley Cup champions. That's Clark Judge here with us on Birds 365. All right, last time out, come back. Put a ball in the show next here on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.